They call him the company whisperer.
Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
And Kirk Dando.
Kirk Dando.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Dando.
I want to pause for a moment before we go into episode 5 here. In the last episode, we talked about the growth playbook. We talked about a couple of the different warning signs of success. Why are we focused on these warning signs of success in this season?
The reason I'm bringing these about is a long time ago when we were growing our company, and I was a young leader and I was learning. I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. I realized that if I was going to really be able to lead my team well with credibility and integrity, I had to do more than just understand growth. I had to be able to kind of define it and give boundaries to it, words to it that resonated, created a common language. I firmly believed back then that if you change the language, you change the conversation. And if you change the conversation, you change the outcome. And so part of that is just having a common language. And so what I recognized over time, not day one, but just over time, and there's really what I've identified as 12 critical mistakes that every business and every leader makes. But the good news is they're avoidable because they're predictable. And I knew that in order to make things simple, we've said this time and time again, I'll keep on saying it, we can operate without certainty, but we struggle without clarity. And there's something about complexity that seems to, it's like a serial killer. It has a way of kind of creeping into a business, and complexity has a unique ability to conceal bad judgment, incompetence, inaction, and people hide behind that complexity. Also, I've been talking a little bit about the sweet little lies that we tend to tell ourselves that keep us from having to face the real truths. And so these 12 warning signs of success, and we're covering, roughly 3 in each of these episodes, are meant to give a language that is common, to create leadership actions and conversation starting points for teams and leaders to move closer to the truth, we've talked about this, to not just normalize the journey, but give it a name, define it, and be able to take action up on it. So these aren't the things that do end up sowing the seeds of our decay, that end up being the things that are disruptive and deteriorate morale and hurt, where the success we want becomes the failure that we didn't intend.
I think one of the things that stood out from the last conversation we had is just everyone has this desire to get to some intended destination, and the journey to getting there, how we get there, why we do the things that we do, it just doesn't get enough attention. And so, as we go through this today, I want to highlight that, today's listener likely feels exhausted. Like that's the ideal listener today, right? Why is that? And what makes this a perfect discussion for that kind of a person to listen to today?
Yeah, this episode is for those executives, for those leaders, for those first-time leaders, for those people that have been in the seat for a long time. They're waking up feeling exhausted, but it's not because of the work. It's because of that constant chaos. There's opportunities, and we're firefighting, and we have unclear expectations. And as a company grows, and I've talked about this, is we start to mistake. Success has a way of masking the issues that make us believe that activity is progress, or that effort, that sincere effort, those good intentions are results. And so it creates that confusion, which when you leave those unchecked, what happens is you erode the culture, you create fractured focus, and you kill performance. And that's what this episode is about, is talking about what, not just identifying those things, because that's not overly helpful. It's kind of an emotional punch in the throat, but we've got to be able to identify them before we can do something about it. So we're going to talk a little bit about both sides, both how to recognize it and what to do about it.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it. So what should listeners be able to do after today's episode?
So there's a handful of things. I want people to recognize where they're mistaking chaos for growth, to really kind of get underneath that and be able to look at that and understand, what are the symptoms of what I call, what is one of the warning signs, what are the symptoms of drinking chaos Kool-Aid? And so, endless to-do lists, overcommitted leadership, the kind of the inability to prioritize and say no. So I want them to be able to recognize that. I want them to be able to identify where leadership, the visibility is broken down into the organization. So diagnose what I call the executive iceberg of ignorance, and really help build communication channels that really do allow us to unlock real truths from those front lines, from the people that are, dealing with things day to day. I want people to rewire kind of their incentive systems to drive the right behaviors, and what I call as a poor performance multiplier. Oftentimes, the incentives are actually driving the wrong behaviors. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that happens. More importantly, some ideas on how to solve those things and get to the heart of those things. We're going to be dropping a lot of assets. And I want people to kind of shift from that urgency driven to outcome driven and learn how kind of that reactive chaos can become more of a ruthless prioritization. Once again, these all sound like nice words and wouldn't it be wonderful? But how do we do these things? And then, really what I want them to experience through working through these things and this journey and this climb that we're on is to really restore their team's energy, the level of engagement and excitement, and ultimately the execution. We talked about in the very first episode, you've got to have a good thesis, you've got to have the right execution, and the macros have got to be, working in something's happening in all three of those things, but really, reestablishing that and install kind of the operating cadence that we talked about in the last episode. And hope is not a strategy. Clarify those roles when we talk about, how to bring clarity to a role, those 5 questions and role clarity, and build a performance culture that scales without burnout.
Hmm.
That's what this episode's about, and that's what I hope people take from it.
It's episode 5. The first couple episodes, I wanted to highlight that you had said earlier on in the season at some point that the first few episodes are to give you mindsets and frameworks, right,
Mhm.
for how to approach the problems that businesses face on the road to scale. And then that you were going to pivot into moving from mindsets and frameworks to, tactical tools and language to address those things. And so I think that's what today is when you say that we're going to be dropping a lot of assets in the show notes,
Mhm.
this is about giving you those practical tools, those one sheeters, those PDFs, the things that you can implement today in
Mhm.
your business. And so we'll try and flag those here for those that are watching this podcast,
Mhm.
using call to action banners on the screen. But for those who are listening with us, you can go into the show notes and extract any of those. We'll call them out as we cover
Mhm.
these throughout today's episode.
Yeah, and again, once again, it'd be nice if we could read everybody's mind and give exactly what everybody needs. What this is representing is over 16,000 different conversations where people have said, "How do you really solve this at a practical level?" That nice names and they're funny, sayings, and they sting a little bit to hear the symptoms, maybe. So what? Now what? What do I do about it? And we're going to try to drop. We're going to try. We are going to drop the things that I use, but it's Sam Decker calls it my magic notebook. I'm kind of emptying the magic notebook as much as I possibly can. But if people have further questions and stuff, ask them,
Mhm.
because once again, the motivation behind this is truly to leave it all on the field. It is. I'm at a point in my career, and I don't want to walk away and just hand in the keys.
Yeah, talk about that here for a second. Before I mean, we're going to dive in. We've got a lot of great stuff to uncover here. Um, Tell me a little bit. I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years, and you kind of just actually peeled the lid back on why you're doing this podcast. Explain your career. Like, I mean, the things that are going into this right now, and your aspiration to do this now. Why now, and why are we sitting here having this conversation?
I've thought a lot about this, and I have had so many people pour into me to teach me, to guide me, to lead me. And I feel like this is just I'm just this vessel that has been filled with things that are kind of rare opportunities. It's pretty rare that you spend 30 years in hundreds of companies with thousands of people and get to see and learn, what's going on behind the scenes, behind the press releases and those things, and you get to see the raw and the real of those things, and it feels cheap. It feels empty to use that just to, you know, earn a living, honestly. I've been very fortunate. I'm very grateful for that. But it's really those lessons learned. And, I don't get a control time when my time comes.
Mhm.
Um, but what I do get to control is try to empty myself out of those things. And if it helps some people, then great. I really hope it does. And that's what this is about. And so it's, in one hand, it's a fun project and I'm excited to do it. On the other hand, it's a little bit overwhelming because I'm trying to guess at what people need to hear and want to hear and trying to extract stories and download PDFs and do all of these things. But in an effort, it is to really, like I said, if it helps somebody, makes somebody think different, or gives them one good idea that makes them wake up and feel a little bit better and not feel the weight that success and growth can sometimes pound you with, then I'll be very happy.
So powerful. Well, thank you for your vulnerability and willingness to share. There's a lot of ways that you could approach handling the last 30 years, and you're still doing this, just to be clear on that as well. And so,
Hmm.
the fact that you're willing to kind of put yourself out there, put the knowledge out there, and truly lay it on the line. I mean, as someone who helps represent getting all of these assets to the public, I know that you are genuinely putting it all out there and trying to summarize as much as you possibly can, and then be willing to customize to people's conversations as they come. Because again, it's not this predictive model that follows a 1, 2, 3 Kirkism step
Hmm.
to success. It's truly having the mindsets, the frameworks, and then the tools and the language to go and reshape the way that these companies and these leaders operate.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, let's dive on in. So, number one, today we've got 3 warning signs of success to cover. Drinking the chaos Kool-Aid. What's it taste like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never been asked that question. Well, it doesn't taste like Kool-Aid.
It doesn't taste like Kool-Aid.
It's kind of that dynamic where your business feels busy, but not better. And, uh, and it's really where, there's opportunity all over the place. And because we haven't done some of the hard work of getting clear about, what are our objectives and goals, the things we talked about in the last podcast, having a good meeting structure that actually, is a great use of time and drives accountability and winning, that, creates momentum. I'm gonna draw a little picture of kind of what it feels like. So if the circle represents the business, and you have a set of leaders that are responsible for driving the business forward. And what that means is they're responsible for setting the tone from the top. The tone from the top are, what are our values? What does accountability look like in our organization? What is the expectation about how people show up, how they treat one another? All these pieces that I kind of call that tone from the top. Um, they're also responsible for setting strategy, for talking about where are we going? What's the infrastructure we're going to put in place to make sure that we're staying in that journey? And oftentimes they get together in offsites and have these conversations. Early on, it's, not a high need for a lot of conversations. They can kind of happen just because we're together. As the organization grows, there's more sophistication and time that's poured into that. Well, we leave those things, those conversations feeling fairly well aligned, but we go out into our organization and we start communicating those things. And there happens a lot of times in meetings, happens in side conversations, it happens over, impromptu dinners. And this is what I see the conversations inside the organization look like. The arrows, the conversations, the arrows represent conversations. They're kind of scattered. They're kind of heading every which direction. You start talking to some people and you start asking some questions, and some people are just maybe going the opposite direction. But inside of this business, there looks like this low level of chaos that's starting to happen. But the business is still moving forward. But this is what happens is you end up with a scattered focus, unintentionally, obviously, but because we don't have these good patterns of behaviors that we've talked about in episode, 3 and 4. Now we're talking about in episode 5. You create scattered focus, we end up with scattered results. And when you end up with those scattered results, it's people, you start to hear these comments of like, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. If we're sitting there and every opportunity that comes along is a great opportunity, all those opportunities just water us down. And all of a sudden, we're creating this sense of unintentional urgency and lack of focus. And what needs to happen is a lot of what we're talking about in this season. It's not just one thing that fixes those things, but how do we create that alignment? How do we create those systems and those expectations around accountability, meaning I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do within the time frame. A lot of times people say what they're going to do, but not within the time frame. But as these discussions and what we talked about, and hope is not a strategy in the last session, last episode is, ways to go about bringing those conversations about, like water over a rock, that rhythm. What's our weekly cadence? What's our monthly cadence? What's our quarterly cadence? What's that agenda? And how do we keep consistent in those things? If anybody didn't listen to episode 4, go back and listen to that, because that's where we cover that. Well, these discussions create this level of alignment where the arrows represent communication again, because I'd say like 99% of the time, what I hear is our communications aren't working, and they aren't really worried about more communications. We're worried about clear communications. What are we doing this? So if you want to know how to apply this in a simple way, look in your organization and say, are our communications driving clarity? Don't worry about, do we have a system for this? Do we have a process? And did we follow this ABCs of growing a business? Just, are you driving clarity? If you can just drive clarity, which happens in your communications, you're most likely going to solve a lot of your problems. Clarity in our job descriptions and our role definitions and all these things. Just step back and be honest with yourself. Am I driving clarity? Well, these organizations tend to take off. Doesn't mean they have a better product or service. It means they have a cleaner, clearer way of communicating. It's not the volume of noise, it's the clarity that drives growth and starts to bring that morale up, that engagement that I was talking about, that energy.
I like what you said about the clarity of the conversation. I really like that because I think it's easy to fall into the trap of like, we've covered this before. Like, I feel like that can be a statement that's said, or just assuming that you're translating something that, wouldn't get lost in translation, essentially. And the results that come of that, I love the word scattered because I think it's very relatable. Scattered to me also, it sounds like, or at least makes me think of, it's hard to predict and it's hard to analyze because it's not necessarily one trend line. So it's easy to kind of almost psychoanalyze, one conversation from another. But when you start to try and map them out, when you have a communication problem or you have a results problem, I feel like that's very hard to actually analyze purely based on the conversations because you're going in so many different directions.
A lot of times I'll ask people, how effective are your meetings? I'm not talking about the part where you get 8 people together. It's one or two, like you and me, can be having a meeting. How effective are our meetings? Do you leave those feeling clearer, more concise, or do you feel like I just added to my to-do list? I'm an overcommitted leader now, whatever the case may be. But what we're trying to do here is drive, and that's a lot of what we're talking about, dropping these in the show notes, assets that help drive this clarity. So one of the things that I coach people when they say like, all right, we're experiencing, that's great, and we're getting better, we're following the growth playbook, and we're using that cadence, and we're actually seeing where it's creating some momentum, but I have these 2 or 3 people over here that I still need to work on, or whatever the case may be. And so I coach them on to use what I call as a 5x5. So in the growth playbook, you have your annual, you have your quarterly, you kind of have those long-ranging kind of goals that you're kind of trying to reverse engineer towards and measure towards. But sometimes you've got to get somebody, I'll draw something else here as
Yeah,
I'm
do
thinking
it.
about it. When someone is starting out in a new skill or haven't done it a bunch, they're unconsciously incompetent. We talked about this in another episode, but I think it's important to bring it back up. That means, for example, I use the example all the time is, riding a bike. Before you never rode a bike, you didn't know you couldn't ride a bike, so you were unconsciously incompetent. Then you got on the bike to try to ride it, and you realize, I'm consciously incompetent. I actually know I cannot ride this bike. But over time, you got better at it. You practiced at it. You became consciously competent. You had to get on the bike, you had to think about it. You could feel the seat under you and feel it wobbling. But over time, you just go out and grab the bike and you're off and going. And you're unconscious. You don't even have to think about it. Competent. Okay? Well, it's a good way to kind of think about where people are in that journey of whatever it is that you're helping them grow and work on. And so the reason I want that up there is sometimes somebody is just starting a new skill or hasn't kind of perfected it, but maybe I have, or I've had the time and I have them do what I call as a 5x5.
Mm.
And it's shorter than the annual. It's 90 days. It's what are the 5 most critical things that I've got to accomplish in the next 5 weeks. That's the 5x5. And so I'm looking at it here, so I have them list out what are the 5 things that you've got to accomplish in this week, not the 50. You may have 500 you've got to do, but what are the non-negotiables? Like, we've got to get those done. And I have them list those out. Why do I have them do that? Because I'm teaching them. It's a coachable moment. Because if they come up with 5 things that don't really matter, then we can have that conversation. Like, how'd you come up with this? Why do you think these are the priority? But creates a coachable moment. So they come up with those 5 things. And then underneath that, each week, at the start of the week, I have them write down what are the 5 commitments they're getting done that week into relation. You can see up above the 5 things that have got to be done in this week. Keeping it simple. Once again, building the habits, building the behavior. So I want to know what you have to do in 5 weeks. And then each week at the beginning of the week, you can just email it to me or whatever, and we might have a quick conversation. And then at the end of the week, did you get it complete? Yes or no? Not like, hey, it's 30%. It's like, did you get it complete? Yes or no? And if it can't be completed in the week, we have that discussion at the beginning. This isn't meant to be paint by numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have an area for diagnosis and reflection. What happened? Why did we get it? What happened? Why didn't we? Whatever the case may be. Over a course of 5 weeks, one is I've taught them how to look out ahead, predict and prepare. I've taught them how to connect it to our overall goals of the business or their area of responsibility, and taught them it's important for us to learn to call the shot and be able to make the shot. And then each week I'm going to be coming alongside them. And now someone listening may be thinking, who has time for that? I have all the time for that. What I don't have time for is chaos Kool-Aid and cleaning up a mess, because everybody in my organization, whether it's 5 people or 5,000 people, are heading in slightly different directions. And so this 5x5 is something that I'll use to help get, that left side that I just drew where the arrows are all going chaotic over to the right side. It's one of the tools that I will use. I'll look and say, this person's obviously either unconsciously, they've never even done this. And I've got to go back. I'm unconsciously competent, meaning I can do it well and I don't even have to think about it. I got to go back and remember what it was like, or when I was consciously incompetent, how I felt like an imposter and was afraid to ask questions because it was going to expose that I didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, listen, I can teach you. If you've got the heart and you're willing to lean in, I can teach you, but we've got to have a structure to teach you. And the 5x5 is one of the things from the magic notebook that I use.
Well, that's one of those assets that we're going to put in the show notes. We'll pop it up on screen here. The 5x5, it's a great asset to be able to go and get in front of things. 5 things to commit to over the course of 5 weeks. Yes or no. Did we do these things? I think it's a great asset.
Yeah, and each week, then you're having 5 commitments to that too. So you're kind of layering it.
The other thing I'd mention on that too is what you described as a mindset. At the end of the day, it's someone's willingness to approach their work that way. Like you said, I don't have time for chaos Kool-Aid. I have time for this. That's a mindset and a decision that needs to be made. And to reference the last episode, we talked about how change is inevitable, but growth is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those choices.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call out. And it's the structural cracks that happen underneath the weight of, or the curtain of success. This is one of those little ones that kind of happens. The other key asset that I would say is helping reduce or dismiss drinking the chaos Kool-Aid is the growth playbook, because that's all about driving clarity deep into the organization.
Right. That's a great call out. So go back, listen to episode 4. If you haven't already, we cover the growth playbook in the middle of that episode. That'll be time stamped out and then also linked in the show notes as well. Before we move on to the next warning sign of success here, just quick question. I mean, in your experience, you've got 30 years of coaching experience. Why is this focus, or the idea of focus, so uncomfortable? Like, why is it so hard to get laser focused on doing the right things for founders? Is it, you've kind of mentioned imposter syndrome. You mentioned in the previous drawing about how you can commit to the wrong person, right?
Mm,
For too long.
mhm.
What is it that makes this so hard to actually do?
So it's interesting. I think people will give it an answer to that, like, "Hey, we're rich with opportunities, and we want to be able to make sure, and things come up, and customers have questions, and we've got to, we can't say no to a customer." And I've heard all of these kind of reasons, and they're valid and decent reasons. But I think one of the things that maybe is more at the heart of it than is people are willing to admit is complexity has this unique ability that I talked about, this way of concealing incompetence. If I'm consciously incompetent, if there's complexity wrapped in it, then it kind of hides that. If inaction, if I'm actually not doing things, but it's because I've got all these things I'm trying to do and everything's a priority, therefore nothing is. So, it conceals, that incompetence, that inaction, or just poor decisions like, oh, my critical thinking is way off.
Hmm.
It's like I said, it's everybody wants to change the world. They don't want to change themselves. The first step in changing yourself is having an honest conversation about what you're good at, what you're not.
Yeah.
And so this focus thing is not as easy as just like let's put in a really stringent, strict, set of rules that if anybody deviates from, they get publicly shamed.
Hmm.
It's sometimes it's stepping back and saying, do we have the guts to actually call what we need to do and stay with it and build the relationships inside the organization that when we do need to change, they can handle the weight of the truth and what it doesn't look like spin. Again, this is mindset. This is,
Hmm.
we talk a lot about assets and tools and things that we will drop into here, but what I can't drop in there are the mindsets. People have to make that choice for themselves.
Yeah, that's really well said. Let's talk about the next warning sign of success for this episode, executive iceberg of ignorance. What is it and how does it form as a company grows?
So, I mean, this isn't something that I'm claiming to have come up with. This is something that actually I've talked about it and kind of named it. I didn't know that other people had as well. But essentially, the iceberg of ignorance is the part of the iceberg that is above the water are the executives, and they see about 4% of the problems. And then you drop down just a little bit low below the water, and you've got like managers, and they see about 9% of the problems. And then you kind of get a little bit deeper below the surface, and you've got supervisors who see about 74% of the problems. And then you get all the way down to the front lines, the people that are doing the work, the people that are implementing these strategies and these ideas, the people that are the benefactors of all this chaos that's getting dripped into the organization. They see 100% and they feel 100% of it.
Mhm.
Well, I had a CEO a long time ago that he would open up almost every meeting, especially when it was company wide, but in executive meetings, and he would talk about the executive iceberg of ignorance. I cannot tell you how many times I hear and learn stuff by talking to people, and the CEO is like, "Why don't they? Why don't they tell me?" And it's I don't know the exact dynamic of it. It's not because they're because I have people that you could tell them and they would love it and they would appreciate it and they would really. It's just I don't know if there's just not time, if there's a um, don't think it's appropriate. There's all kinds of reasons. But what he would say is, "But this is a real thing, and I don't want this to be the thing that hurts our organization." What he was doing is he was normalizing that this is a dynamic that plays out in every company, and I wanna call it out. I wanna bring it front and center. I wanna push it into the light, and I wanna tell all of you, let's not let this be the thing. If something's gonna get it, let's not be because the people that are on the front lines don't have the ability to kind of raise their hand. And I'm going to tell you some tools on how you can help people raise their hand and do it. And and also, not everything everybody knows is accurate. They don't always have the context. You hear it's lonely at the top of the iceberg. It's lonely because you're going to get judged out of context because people don't. You can't give them the context all the time on everything, and you get judged in a vacuum. But that is not a reason to create the iceberg of ignorance.
Mhm. It makes me think. So I've grown up in an entrepreneurial home. My dad, he's currently the owner of multiple businesses. He's run multiple. He sold one to a Fortune 500 when I was younger, and I actually was old enough to remember walking into that building and what that was like. And you mentioned, I don't know what the dynamic or the reason why the information doesn't always flow from the 100% to the iceberg of
The
ignorance where the
4%,
executives.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, in my experience, just growing up under his leadership as my dad, but also he exposed me to a lot of the business, and still we talk often about what they're doing, and
Mhm.
it's fascinating to me as I jump into my own career and whatnot. I think it would be almost information overload, like the weight of the company on one single person
Mhm.
is probably more than one person can bear,
Mhm.
frankly, and
Mhm.
someone who's not just observing, but is, like, also
Mhm.
responsible to a board of investors, responsible to whoever the stakeholders are, responsible to the most junior person in the organization for
Mhm.
showing up day in and day out,
Mhm.
and so what I wanted to call out actually is that I've seen my dad bring that home. We have conversation. We just had one the other day of just when things are overwhelming and the information is almost too much to bear,
Mhm.
to process and sort through and make a decision on.
Mhm.
I think about that with him, and then you could look. We just had a very large current event in our world,
Mhm.
with President Trump deciding to enact this operation over in Iran, and
Mhm.
the decision making power and how much goes into that, and the need to go off of your gut.
Mhm.
um, I think that's really important. I'm curious, how does that play into this? Just that gut instinct where, yes, there is this iceberg of ignorance, and we're going to talk through some of these dynamics, but also how important is it to be able to trust your gut and make quick, informed decisions?
One of the things I always coach my CEOs, whenever they come and ask me a question, they can almost guarantee that they're gonna get asked, "Well, what are your instincts telling you?" Because I want people to learn to trust their instincts. Not that every single one's right, but I want them to learn to be able to listen to those honestly
Mhm.
and completely. So that's part of it. The other part of it is you alone can do it, but you cannot do it alone. And that's part of what that's talking about when I say that is you've got to surround yourself with teammates, mentors, that can help. We talked about in the last episode, we all have blind spots. Thank goodness we don't all have the same ones. So you've got to be able to filter the communications and understand what is critical, what's misunderstood, what's going to be problematic for the business that I need to get ahead of. And once again, it is lonely because there's a lot depending upon your ability to be listening to hear what's not being said and
Mhm.
be able to read those situations. But too many times, I think that because of the weight of that, we unintentionally create this iceberg of ignorance and wait for things to show up in the results. And then people are becoming increasingly frustrated saying, I told you so. And it's not that every single person in the company can have access directly that communication to the CEO at certain sizes. It's not even possible, but that's why you have org structure, which we've talked about, that's not a rake. That's why you have communication patterns where people are communicating asynchronously and being able to tell you and their confidence level if we're going to do things. So you set up these structures and these systems to be filters, but sometimes it just gets through and it gets too much. And that's when, like I said, you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone.
Mhm. How, in your experience, how often is it that executives will say, "I feel like I've repeated myself 100 times," or, something to that
Hmm.
degree where the frustration is there and they're not sure, why the message isn't getting through?
Mhm.
How often does that come up?
Yeah, I'm smiling because it happens all the time. And once again, there's oftentimes when I dig underneath that is it's one-way communication. They're not asking the simple question, "What did I say? What did you hear?" They're not actively listening to what the business is trying to tell them, not the people. That's part of it, but what's the business telling us? Not what the numbers,
Mm.
but what's it really telling us? Where are the fires? They're not taking the time to build the relationships that can handle the weight of the truth. They don't know, you know, I know how you're performing because I can look at your numbers and I can, we've got software that tracks your progress, whatever the case may be, but I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're passionate about, what you laugh about, what you cry about, what brings you joy. Who are you? Where are you at in your journey? And how can I help you take that next step? And there's some other tools that we'll talk about here in a minute to help kind of, once again, not where it's just people are they're backing up their dump truck and dumping it everywhere in the business. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about getting real signal quickly so we can do something about it.
Yeah, and I think you described the concept of that for you leader, which has been the obviously name of this podcast and theme in this series is just someone who will care more about what they can put into you than get out of you. So the caveat there is that the leader is operating under the bias of how can I help this person more than how can I get something out of them.
Yeah. By this episode 5, people that have listened to the other episodes, 1 is thank you. And 2 is I hope you're getting something from it. And 3 is you're hearing some common threads that are starting to get pulled. And that's not by accident. It's intentional. It's not because we don't have enough content. It's because I don't want people to sit there and make this harder than it is. It's already hard enough. But when I'm saying like, man, he keeps talking about this, or he keeps referring to this certainty versus clarity or this or that, it's like, maybe I want to pay attention to that. Maybe they're there.
Well, I can attest these things have popped up for me, and we talk about them often, and I don't get tired of talking about them with you. So,
Okay, good.
Is there anything else you wanted to cover on Executive Iceberg?
Yeah, so let me talk about a concept called the 515. The CEO of Patagonia came up with, not a small business. He wanted to be out testing product and out in the community, but he deeply cared about what was happening. What was that tone inside the organization? Was the tone from the top, getting down in the organization? What was that tone coming back? But he knew he didn't have time to talk to everybody, so he came up with this process called a 515. Essentially, what it is it's 3 questions, but he would have everybody in his organization do a 515. What it is, it shouldn't take any one person more than 5 minutes to review it, and it shouldn't take any person putting it together more than 15 minutes a week. So each week, he would have people put together a 515. I had another CEO of a really large organization do this where everybody, the only people that didn't do it was him and his founder with each other. But literally everybody in this company had over probably, 800, maybe 1,000 people in it. And it was kind of, you can make the questions whatever you want it to be, but here's the questions. One is just a gut check. How's it going? On a scale of 10, couldn't be better. 1, couldn't be worse. I'm ready to quit, and why? You're going, wow, no one's going to say that. Well, that's a whole nother issue. If people can't have that level of honesty, we need to work on that. That's okay, but we need to work on that because people need to feel safe. Because that's one of the ways to create an iceberg of ignorance is create where you don't have conditions of trust. When we talk about that with Colin Powell and in the essence of leadership, listen to that on YouTube. Put that in the show notes.
I was going to say we can link out to that.
Link out to that for sure. 2 minutes, much shorter than this. But if you don't have conditions of trust and safety, that's something else that needs to be worked on. But gut check, how you doing? 2, kind of what are issues, problems, or open items? Kind of, give some context to why you gave that grade. And then notables, that's kind of free form. Like, hey, here's what's going on, or I really appreciate this, or I'm starting to see this happen over here, or whatever. And did he review everybody's in the business? Absolutely not. But you could start to see, you could kind of see scores that were low, scores that were high. He'd kind of spot check. And he'd go and meet with those people and talk to them and sincerely listen to what was happening. And so whenever I coach CEOs, I have them do a 515 before our coaching sessions. The questions are a little bit different. The questions are, whether Air Force, Navy, Army, whatever the case may be, Rangers, SEALs, massive amount of planning that goes into that. And then sure enough, when they go out to implement and deploy that, something happens. A key asset maybe gets blown up. The weather is not where it needs to be. Like on D-Day, the weather was really bad. People were landing where they weren't supposed to. And so they realized that they had to have something that got people focused. And they came up with what was called a commander's intent. It was like, if we do nothing else by, and then they put a time box, we must. And then they finish that sentence. So when something goes wrong, people are like, still know what we do. I mean, the plan got completely destroyed, but if we do nothing else by this time frame, we must. And so with my CEOs, we use that as saying, if we don't do anything else in the next 6 months, we must. And then I have them finish that sentence, and that we're aiming at something. Once again, aim at nothing, you will hit your target. So we're aiming at something. So that's our destination. And then we have a 515. I just simply ask them, on a scale of 0 to 10, how is it going? Kind of that gut check question. I also want to know, mentally how they're doing. So on a scale of 0 to 10, what's going on? What's going on between your ears and in your heart? And then the third question is on a scale of 0 to 10, how are things going at home? And they get that to me before we meet. And then I also have them say, give me some free form, give me some notables, how we doing against the commander's intent and stuff like that. It doesn't take more than 15 minutes, probably takes them less than 10, honestly, to prepare it. But, that's a way of, once again, checking in, hearing that clarity, learning who are you, where are you at, how can I help you take this next step? We talked about the growth playbook. The growth playbook without a 515 gets really watered down because we have so many mechanisms inside of a business that measure the health and the well-being and the success or failure of the business, but we have very few that pour into the individual, the people that are making it happen day in and day out. Why wouldn't we want something that took them no more than 15 minutes a week and took me no more than 5 minutes to review, or across my organization to gut check it, and have my managers and leaders looking at their teams, they're looking at them for sure, but create this rhythm that creates trust, that creates safety, that gets the front lines telling the people, that are sitting, far away from the issues, what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, another powerful aspect of that tool, which we'll link the 515 in the show notes, pop it up here on the video. I'm just somewhere over here, it's popping up, just to call that out. But one of the powerful things too, and there's multiple ways you can do this. I think this review process, and actually when I first started out of college, um, the first software I got put in when I started at that first company was a software to manage. I think it was actually called 15.5. It might
Yeah,
have been back, but
it was.
anyway.
Yeah, and I actually met with the CEO in a previous podcast.
Oh,
Not this
cool.
one. Yeah, interviewed him on it.
Oh,
We
that's
talked about it. Yeah,
that's
he
awesome.
he knew the CEO of Patagonia, and he just flipped it to 15.5.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, like,
Mm.
getting plugged into that, what I learned from doing that at very early in my career, so the way that it would work is I would fill mine out. My manager would see that. Our regional director had access to all of that, and that was his way of basically being like, I will get the voice from your individual contributors so that when you and I meet, what you tell me is either going to match or mismatch what your team is
Mhm.
saying. I didn't know that at the time. Again,
Mhm.
fresh out of college, didn't
Mhm.
know what I was getting into. But one of the rhythms that it brought into the business that was really, really valuable that I didn't realize was it created one of those like subconscious, unconscious touch points
Mhm.
to check in. Like we
Mhm.
had one-on-ones. I had one-on-ones with my manager, and he and I had very good rapport where I was kind of an open book and he was
Mhm.
with me, and so
Mhm.
we had really good conversations, and so the 15.5, 515 for me was not it wasn't something that was, like, super impactful. I enjoyed them because I enjoy writing,
Mhm.
and I enjoy
Mhm.
expressing where
Mhm.
I'm at, and I enjoy getting that feedback as well, and so for me, it was fun, but it also I mean, we already had those conversations, but what was helpful was that when things got really busy, having that touch point
Mhm.
of like, "Hey, we're gonna fill this out." It wasn't the magic in that wasn't doing it once, it was having that as a recurring reminder that we need to be checking in with ourselves and being honest with ourselves.
Yeah, the consistency is important, and the other part of it that I want to really stress and say is how you use this tool matters. Obviously, if you use it as a gotcha versus a coachable moment, if you use it in any way that is anything other than to really learn and understand, the second it gets used poorly, you might as well just stop it, just kill it right on the spot. It's a tool. A chainsaw is in fact a tool, but I do not go to bed at night and fire up my chainsaw and try to brush my teeth with that tool. It's a bad use of that tool.
Yep.
So you got to use a tool correctly with integrity. Are you using the tool? Could you put your values of your company and say, yeah, we're using that tool that it supports our values?
Mhm.
Because if you're not, the quickest way to kill a culture is either protect or beat up the wrong people for the wrong reasons.
Mhm. Well, to call out the resources you've so far, and I'm setting myself up for failure when we have a third one coming, but we have the 5 by 5, we have the 515 unintentionally named the same thing. I don't anticipate here that we're about to name another 5, but
Yeah.
let's go to the third
Growth playbook is another one.
growth playbook that's referencing a previous
Yep.
episode. So
That's
yeah,
The Iceberg of Ignorance, the graphic.
the graphic, and then we also have Colin Powell's
Yes.
Essence of Leadership.
And one other one we referred to in a previous meeting to drive clarity to help is grade your meetings on some set of criteria. We talked about it in episode 4, so I won't go down that rabbit hole again. But pick something that you're not good at and make that the criteria, because the goal is to get better. Don't pick something you're already good at. Pick something you're terrible at. If you're terrible at starting meetings on time, and you have 8 people or waiting on 2 that are late, get better at that. Whatever. Have fun with it. It's not meant to be a tool to beat people. It's meant to be a tool to get better, to drive more clarity. Doesn't cost you anything.
Well, picking something that you weren't good at it has been your story. You've had that mindset for many years, way back to starting in accounting and many more things before that. I know that's tried and true of who you are and your character.
Well, thank you.
All right, let's talk about this third one here. So poor performance multiplier. How does this show up in companies, and what does this mean?
So a lot of times, companies have bonus programs, incentive programs, spend tons of money and time trying to figure out the math of them. And really at the end of the day, it's kind of a meritocracy, right? They're trying to reward performance and behaviors. And I've seen one of these really elaborate systems, and I understand the logic of them and stuff like that, but I go and ask people saying, how does the incentive work here? And they're like, it's this and that, and I don't know. I mean, I don't really know. So once again, you've made this huge investment of one train to reward performance, not reward effort. I'm a firm believer in praise effort, but only reward performance. Companies that reward effort run the risk of going out of business, and that doesn't help anybody. And that's an extreme, but you end up not getting any kind of real value out of incentives that don't align to the goals of the business, the behaviors of the business. And so it becomes this multiplier of poor performance unintentionally, obviously, and that's why it's named poor performance multiplier. I see too many times where people don't either understand how to give themselves a raise through the incentives, or we get through the year and it's like we didn't hit any of our goals, but we're going to give 75% of it because, man, everyone's going to be mad. It's become entitlement. And if we don't give it, we'll run the risk of losing them. Okay, well then, so now you've just established what the real incentive is try hard, which is fine, but just call it that then. If any people aren't trying hard, we're not going to have bonuses this year. And that sounds harsh. Sounds very that's not realistic. I'm just saying what's not realistic is to say, we're going to do something, you'll get an incentive. We didn't do that, and here's your incentive. That just causes problems, and it demoralizes. And then even worse, then people are sharing that did hit those things. And they're wondering, well, wait a minute, what's going on? And then you start to create this us versus them unintentionally environment where people are looking at each other. And you created a competitive environment, which a meritocracy does. That is a competition, and in itself is the top performers are going to get rewarded. If you're going to put that into place, do it in a very thoughtful way. I see oftentimes where they'll also say, well, we can't incentivize them on that because they don't control that. If it's something that's for the goals of the business, if you have people in your business that can't control something that help with that, that's another question you may want to be asking yourself, what are they doing? They may not have direct control over it. An engineer may not have direct control on how a deal gets closed and sold, but their ability to create a great product, to create something that doesn't cause churn, the thing that makes, a feature that makes sell better, absolutely they have a responsibility. It may not be direct, but I need to help them understand how their indirect contribution, sports, the people on the field are not out there. They're standing on the shoulders of the people that printed off the tickets, the people in the back office that are making decisions that, they didn't show up and, fill up their own locker. Someone else hung those clothes and got those cleaned and did those things and stuff like that. Everybody contributes to the winning. I just have to help people understand that and make it believable, because if it's got spin on it, that's insulting. That's basically saying somebody doesn't have intelligence to see through the spin, but it's got to be real. And so one of the things, and another asset that we'll drop in here is a performance review. I see these performance reviews and I see these 360 reviews, and they've got all these questions and everything else like that. And I'm just like, they're great questions, but they really aren't they're directionless. They're feel good. They don't really amplify the right focus and the right behaviors. And we've overcomplicated it. Like I said, complexity conceals bad judgment, inaction, incompetence. And I see a lot of it played out in the poor performance multiplier, the incentives that are built.
Mhm. You mentioned what we're dropping a resource in, so flagging that we'll have that performance review resource, popping it on the screen here, also dropping in the show notes as well. I want to go backwards here for a second, though. You made a comment about just effort, the idea of effort. If we're going to reward effort, um, I don't want to say this is the first time. I'm going to take you on a journey here for a second, but I don't want to say this is the first time this has happened. And the reason I'm going to say that is because our CEO at Sustainment, he co-authored a book with Joseph Kopser, who you know really well,
Mm,
board member of Sustainment, and he's got a bunch of stuff he's involved in the Austin community as well. They wrote a book called Catalyst, and the purpose of Catalyst was to go and basically put words behind the data of different turns of different centuries in different industries to help predict the future. I just got done reading this actually when we were on vacation. McKenna and I were on vacation in Hawaii.
mhm.
That's where I got this polo, which is
Okay,
great.
nice.
Thanks to you, it helped me go play out there, and lovely family members going in on that.
Mhm,
And so, anyway, the book essentially what he does is they go through these different turns, and some of those turns could be like um, the first computer was built, and the thought process across the industry was that no one would want a computer in their home. Like
mhm,
computers were for work, and then obviously we look now and like we have computers in our pockets right now, right?
yep,
Same thing with cars, right? Like that cars were only for the elite, and then now we're to the point of not only there's obviously electric vehicles out there, but we actually have Waymos
mhm,
out there, right? We went through a ride share revolution, and then we are now into a driverless car revolution, right?
mhm,
And so these are things, and there's catalysts that help get you to but those are turning points, right? That
mhm.
ultimately happen. One of the biggest turning points, and this is where I want to take this journey and really get your thoughts on this. And just to preface, we haven't actually covered this for this topic, so I'm really interested to see what you say here. Um, every CEO right now, every high growth CEO, let's put it that way, um, at the top of their list is, and this is probably in like a McKinsey study or something, but I mean,
Mhm,
this is I'm qualitatively just making this assumption. At the top of the list is what is our AI strategy
mhm.
for most, if not all, high
Yeah,
growth
oh, yeah,
CEOs right now.
yeah, yeah.
So this is a time where I think the world is actually not rewarding effort because AI is showing us where we can remove effort,
Mhm,
and it's rewarding energy and people who know how to apply energy
mhm,
to create more output. How does that play into this poor performance multiplier? Like, what are the risks of not adopting AI strategies that help
mhm.
you focus energy? And how can CEOs leverage AI to avoid falling into this trap?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that deserves, kind of a deeper conversation than we have time here for. But at a high level, promise we'll cover this because this is something I'm talking about every one of my CEOs. But I just had this conversation today with a CEO is at their next board meeting is talking about how the use of AI and what it does for performance and how people are using it. Is going to be part of their next board meeting. How are they hiring around it? How are they teaching? I have one company that we during the culture conversation in one of our offsites, they came up with this idea where they put teams of people together each week. I think it's each week, maybe every other week, and they compete against each other on how they're using AI, not just in the business, but personally, just like all these different ideas. The whole idea is to kind of crowdsource, if you will, just getting comfortable with how are we using AI, what are different applications, and just getting people to get weighed into this and use it. And they have seen a significant bump in their performance. But what they do is they have competition. They have a panel that kind of rewards the winner each week, and they mix up teams and stuff. At the end of the year, I'm not suggesting everybody should do this, but they made it fun, and the team that has won the most, or the people that have won the most throughout the year, get a trip to Hawaii.
Wow.
But once
That's
again,
pretty
they're just trying
cool.
to make it fun because they're
Yeah.
building it in. But in this performance and how they're doing their performance reviews and stuff like that, it's becoming a non-negotiable. I had another CEO that recently wrote basically like a Jerry Maguire type of memo to the company saying, if you're not doing this, not only you're going to fall behind, in your career, which he did genuinely care about, you're going to get passed up here at the business.
Mhm.
And here's the things that we're going to do to correct those things. Effort is a lot harder. The complexity is a lot harder to hide behind. It's still there, but yeah, that's a great question about the AI.
Well, let's put a bow on this then. So how
Let me there's 2 assets I wanna make sure and talk about just really
see
quick.
more assets? Here we
Yeah,
go.
well, no, I just wanna make sure
These are all
that
free.
people know what they're looking for. So one is just how do we do the performance, and I'll drop this in there, but I do wanna give a little context so people just aren't looking at it,
Okay.
because this one is very customized to me, and the point is everybody should customize this, but essentially, um, this gets to the heart of really what matters inside, your business, and so I have 10 things that make someone irreplaceable to the business. And I've thought a lot about those things for my business. And I've changed it with different businesses that I've run or helped operate. But I think through those, and some of the them's, for me and what we're currently do, anybody that's going to work with me, I think about, and when I do this, I fill out on this, does a person do this? And I have them fill out. We come together and we see where there are gaps, where we agree, where we have different, because one of the things I always ask people about is are they clear on what their responsibilities are? And they say yes, which is a terrible question because I don't know if they are or not. They just answer yes. But what I follow that on is tell me what those responsibilities are. Well, if they don't know, people that want to win, they want to have that sense. So I'm not going to read every single one of these questions, but one of them is like people that find and raise up other leaders. They're totally trustworthy. We talk about what that means. Each of these have deep meaning to the people because we talk about them. They've got great people skills. They look for ways to help lift my load. They're looking for ways that there's a lot that I carry. I want somebody that's by my side that cares about that. They represent the business well. There's certain things. So I think what those 10 kind of things are, those characteristics of those things, and those are we're working on this. And then I have 6 key questions. Once again, people can see these. These are mine. You need to think of your own. If you like some of mine, that's great. Like, do you know what excellence in your role looks like? Yes or no? If they answer yes, the following question is, tell me what that looks like. And if they don't get it, or if they get 90% of it, and I say, that's right, but here's this other piece that you kind of are missing. So I'm getting the clarity. Another one is my ideas and plans have increased customers and profits. You go, huh? Well, that's what we are in the business to do, is to serve customers and to hopefully create a profit to
Mhm.
be able to do that. So I want them to know that they're contributing. I want them to feel like they're winning. And if they feel like, no, I don't know how that's working, that's my fault. That's my responsibility to be able to teach them that. Another one is, I do whatever it takes to help other leaders in my department or in my organization. Yes or no? All right, give me some examples of where you've done that. Or if my answer is no and theirs is yes, then we have that uncomfortable conversation. Um, what are you doing to grow? Not just grow here at the business, in your life. Maybe you're taking a cooking class, maybe you're learning to play the piano, or whatever the case may be. Growth is a choice. And I want to see that people are making that choice. So if you don't grow, eventually you got to go. And people know that. Once again, these are also things that people know and are their expectations. And when they come in, when I'm hiring somebody new, I showed them this and say, this is what we're going to be talking about because this is what matters.
Mhm.
It's not, so it's not
This is the real truth ultimately. I mean,
exactly.
some of that's not easy to digest, but it's important. And for those who are willing, I mean, again, you've said growth is a choice, change is inevitable. And
Mhm.
yeah, just stepping up to face these questions, I think, is the first step. I mean, I forget the quote and who said it, but I think they said like showing up is 80% of the effort, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes just even being willing to answer these questions is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah. A couple more is just, about are you exceeding, meeting, or not meeting expectations? Everybody has a different definition. Like if you say meeting, everybody wants to be exceeding. So when you don't tell them you're
Mhm.
exceeding, they feel beat up. And it's like, no, like meeting is like, that's great. Like exceeding is like but each person has their own definition. That's my point. Not the
Mhm.
question's a great question. The point is like, what's our definition? What's the tone that we're setting here? Who am I training to be my replacement or be somebody that can do, generally what I can do? Because if the business is going to grow, like, we want you to be able to grow with it. Not everybody has somebody that's replacing. Uh, there's one question that, like, if I knew what I knew about you today and you walked into the room to interview for your job, would I hire you on the spot or would I tackle you in the parking lot, not let you get away? Yes
Mhm.
or no? If the answer is yes, great, we talk about that. If the answer is no and that's uncomfortable, that's not a surprise. That's not the first time they're hearing about it, but we talk about what can we do to get that to a yes. And if somebody's too new for me to really know, then I I mark down, 6 months from now or whatever, 3 months. I got to be a yes or no because I owe that to that person because I've got to get them to a yes. I don't want to get anybody to a no.
Mhm.
But if I know in 3 months, I've got to be honest with myself and I can't get them there, it's not going to be because I didn't try and pour into them. It's going to be because they shook their head yes, but said no in all their actions.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Once again, I'm not saying every one of these was perfect. When this person walks into the room, everybody's excited to see him. Yes or no? I want a culture where people are enjoy where they're working. And then at the end of it is an action plan. What are three of your strengths? What are three areas I think you need to work on? And what's one thing that's got to be true by the time next time we meet and do this about every 4 months? So it kind of gets to the heart. It's can be uncomfortable conversations. Once again, it's a tool. If you use it poorly, like brushing your teeth with a chainsaw, it's not going to go well. And then the other one is competency mapping. Too many times I see where people write a job description to sell somebody on buying the job or, promote it or someone else wrote it. We talk about how to write a job description, use those 5 questions and role responsibility. But once you have that job description, you can create this competency mapping. And what I do this for my CEOs, where we basically go through their job description. We have categories. There's a category under, they're responsible for focusing the company. Another category, balance company-wide commitment and get planned results in. And then we've got things under that. Develop a leadership team. We've got things like that. Provide inspiration, what that talks about. Systematize the company for quality, timeliness, and efficiency. Quality and timeliness creates happy customers. Efficiency within budget creates a company that we can grow and do more with. So that's why those things are. And then a CEO checklist. They're responsible for setting a clear vision, for hiring a world-class team, lead the strategic planning process. So I've got bullets underneath each one of those. But then I have them grade themselves on a scale of 0 to 10. Then I give them a score because I'm big country. I have their team anonymously give them a score. I have their board give them a score, and more importantly, comments. So it's what I call competency mapping. You can create it, and I have companies that create it for all their positions. They just take the job description because this is what we said we wanted you to do, and they just literally drop it into something where you can measure and have people measure around those things.
Yeah.
And it's like, but in order to measure it, you got to have clear understanding. I can't tell you how many people. I mean, had another call today where somebody is wildly frustrated and ready to quit their job because they don't feel like anybody understands their job, and people are asking them to do stuff that is outside of their scope of responsibility, or they're getting weighted down, overcommitted because people aren't clear on what they're supposed to be doing, and they want to be a good person and they want to provide value, but now they're starting to lose hope. So that's another asset that we'll drop in there.
That's awesome. Well, we'll drop those assets in. I was going to ask you what tools you have to help, but I mean, there's no shortage of tools in this episode. Tons of resources going in the show notes. Just to kind of bring this home, how are all of these connected? We've talked about chaos, blind spots, poor incentives, and how that creates misalignment within an org and that multiplying effect. How are all of these connected, and what's the danger, and what can leaders be doing to prevent that?
These are kind of the silent killers that kind of linger and throw off a lot of symptoms. And so their connectivity is, they're just part of the bigger scope of warning signs of success. So I think people by now, if they've been listening, there's connective tissue between all of these. But, really what the purpose and the connection of these, once again, are just a different angle to have a more real, honest, and raw conversation. And that, once again, that's my hope. I've seen it happen firsthand. But once again, people are listening. I'm not there with you to implement them with you. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that there's something that just rang true to you something that jumped out, a word or phrase, example, you downloaded something, and the impact of these 3 warning signs of success that we talked about don't be the things that slow your business down.
That's right. It's really well said. There's tons of resources. Please go download those resources from this. And to carry that hope on, I'll say, and we'll say this in the transition here shortly, but just to document it here in the actual main episode, this episode 6 coming up next, just to get your raw, real thoughts, normalizing the journey. This is a special one. We're bringing in your daughters, your other 2 son-in-laws behind your favorite one. And we're going to have a conversation there with your family members. Give me just a little insight into what people can expect next episode.
Well, part of it is I don't totally know what to expect because you're kind of leading this. But the reason I wanted to do something with my family, it's not about me and my family. Of course, I love them, and of course, I'm excited to show them off and be with them. But it's really because I spend so many times with CEOs that there's something more about your personal legacy. And a legacy isn't what you leave behind in your bank accounts and in your home and everything else like that. Your legacy is what others carry forward because of who you are and how you show up. And as executives, as leaders, as people that are responsible for creating, an income, whatever that may be, there's something really important about how you show up at home. And so this is going to be raw and real. I don't know what questions are going to ask, but I do, there's big mistakes I've made and things that I regret. And I want to show people, once again, it's the journey's real. And I, like I said, I don't know exactly what to expect, but I'm hoping it's helpful.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you putting yourself on the line. It's a special episode, so be sure tune into that. 2 weeks from this episode's launch, we'll be launching that episode. Tons of resources again, one last time to download from this. Kirk, thank you as always. Great episode. Great talking to you.
Well, thank you, Spencer. You are doing a fantastic job. I'm having an absolute ball doing this. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, thank you. I love the opportunity, and I'm having a great time with you as well.
Good. Thank you. In this last episode, we talked about what happens when chaos creeps into your company, how communication breaks down, performance gets misaligned, and growth starts to feel heavy instead of exciting. In our next episode, we're going to pivot to something special. We're pulling back the curtain and inviting you behind the velvet rope for a personal conversation with the people who mean the most, my daughters and their husbands. This episode isn't about me or my family. It's about something much bigger. It's about what happens when you stop defining yourself by your role at work and start thinking about the legacy you're building at home. We'll talk about the tension between being present at work and present at home, what leadership looks like when no one's watching or when everybody's watching, and how the people closest to you experience your values, your habits, and yes, even your quirks. Whether you're a founder, a CEO, an investor, or an executive, you are also a son or a daughter, a spouse, a parent, a mentor. This episode is a space to reflect on what really matters, not just building a great business, but building a life that others are proud to be a part of, because leadership is who you are in those quiet moments. And a true legacy is not what you leave behind, it's what others carry forward because of you.
Thank you for tuning in to the For You Leaders podcast with Kirk Dando. If this episode helped you think more clearly or act more decisively, that's good. But the journey doesn't stop there. Subscribe for more content on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or go to Kirk's website at kirkdando.com to inquire about coaching opportunities. Now think of a friend, family member, or business leader in your life. How could you help normalize their journey today? Share this podcast with them. We hope that this sparks meaningful conversations in your life and that it enables you to become the leader that you aspire to be.